Hi and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. This episode, we're going to talk about the importance of design when it comes to cannabis consumption technology. You may not think it at first, but inhaling from a really intelligently designed vape or pipe can change your experience of cannabis altogether. It's kind of like eating a really decadent meal off of a fine china plate instead of a paper plate. The vape and smoking tech we can use nowadays has really grown up since the era of carving handmade pipes from apples or using 2-liter plastic bottle bongs. Now we can enjoy our weed in a sleek, high-end handheld marijuana vaporizer that delivers the same dose with each puff without any telltale scent and then slips discreetly back into its elegantly crafted carry case. That kind of technological progress is why today's cannabis paraphernalia companies are focusing heavily on really well-designed smoking tech. Like devices that vaporize cannabis effortlessly and taste clean, look sophisticated, and fit in with our personal style or home decor, all while having minimal impact on the planet. Our guest this episode is James Choe, CEO of Vessel Brand, a cannabis consumer tech and accessories company out of Southern California that creates carefully designed and incredibly aesthetically pleasing consumption products, like high-end one-hitter pipes, vaporizers, and grinders. We'll be back to chat about design with James Choe after this quick break.
So you're in Carlsbad. I lived in Carlsbad for about 5 years. It was one of my first stops in America. Are you from there?
I'm not from here. I'm originally from the Bay Area. I've been in San Diego for off and on about 22 years now. Carlsbad's relatively new. I've been in North County for about 8 years now. Been all over the county, starting from a startup I was at 18 to finishing school in San Diego proper. But ultimately, North County, given all of the new tech, the biotech, the sports, the community that's been built in this area, it's been a nice place to settle down. So definitely home for now.
Yeah, San Diego is such a great little part of the world.
What brought you here?
I was sort of settled in Dallas for a while, and had a friend over in San Diego, and I went out to visit her, and I was like, why am I living in Dallas? Why in the world would I stay in Texas when there's somewhere like San Diego? So, in mid-20s, and I just sort of wanted to explore a bit more. Originally, I'm from London. I don't stay put very much, so hopped around. And yeah, Carlsbad was one of my favorite places that I lived. And actually, cannabis sort of came back into my life when I was in Carlsbad. I did not want to touch it when I lived in Texas, but when you come to Carlsbad and you start socializing, cannabis becomes a part of your life, right?
There's something about good weather, active lifestyle even, and just being coastal that I think it all vibes for sure. So my sentiments are exactly the same. As long as I can see the ocean at least twice a day, I'm at peace.
I do miss that. When I lived out there, it was like 2012.
Yeah.
Everybody was very excited about legal medical marijuana out there at the time, and rec was coming in, but nobody was sort of delving into the stuff that we've seen develop over the past few years. I don't even think anybody was vaping back then over there, but now vape devices are huge, and just sort of the way that we have related to cannabis has got to have changed. Have you seen a lot change just in the time between starting Vessel in 2018 and now?
I think every day it presents a unique evolution in this industry. I mean, you think back to our younger days, all of us coming from different places, different walks of life. Our first introduction to cannabis was always whatever your friend had presented to you. There wasn't any discerning one option versus another or understanding clearly how you might feel. It was a bit of plain roulette. Sometimes you smoked or consumed and you were paranoid, and other times you were fully zonked out and it was time for bed. But when you see the science develop and you see the discipline of brands these days in the space, they're starting to categorize product in ways that trust is being built between the plant and the consumer. And beyond that, even it's evolving into, like you nailed, which is what Vessel's done, which is create and focus on developing experiences so that the consumption is actually more enjoyable, better performing, and delivers that often promised experience that every cannabis would want for its consumers. And so even today, when it's such a nascent industry, in the beginning, it's always going to be a little bit chunky and even ugly in a lot of ways because it's just about getting to market and building the industry. But it's attracting a lot of smart, proven, talented individuals that are taking a keen eye to developing better. And that gets expressed in so many ways, from quality to delivery, and then even thoughtfulness that go beyond that to think about environment, sustainability, and so on. So yes, the evolution is constant. That's what you want in an industry like this. But there's so much ground to cover. So, every day we look forward, it's always competing against ourselves as well. let alone our peers in the industry in a healthy way. But how do we continuously improve the game and make this thing a better sustainable industry for the long haul?
So let's talk about how Vessel's been doing that and how you've been building and designing better weed tech products, essentially. This is like a high-end line of vape and dried herb accessories. And we've come a long way since I was poking holes in a Coke can and smoking my weed through apples and things like that. So now we have all these different technological ways of ingesting cannabis. What do you think the importance of design is in the cannabis space in general? And then what is Vessel's design philosophy?
It's a really good question, and it can be answered in so many ways, but I'll try to keep it simple. The design ethos, or the value of design in Vessel and what we've built, was just really predicated on the years and years we spent in consumer goods generally. Most of our team has spent time in nearly every sector, from food and beverage to sporting goods to apparel, sports nutrition, you name it. And if you've been in the game of, creating brands of desire for consumers, one thing becomes true, that you almost have to force yourself to get past the brand, the product, and think more about the intangibles of the experience. And what I mean by that is the thoughtfulness that's crafting the things that consumers might not think about. It's the experiences they didn't know to expect. It's the performance that has ubiquity across so much of what so many brands have to offer. And there's a humility in approaching this that says we can't solve every problem even, but having focus and making your brand known for doing one thing exceptionally well. In this case, for Vessel, it was a timing game. Years ago, our team had success building some of the leading brands in cannabis in California. And it wasn't because we were cannabis gurus or experts, but we just had a formula that really thought about the consumer, the behaviors, the UX, the UI, even in terms of crafting experiences that said, look, at the time, and we use this analogy a lot, but if you thought about a $200 bottle of cab or a wine, could you drink it out of a red Solo cup? For sure. But would it equate to an experience that you'd want to share with family, friends, or at a nice event? The answer is no.
Yeah.
And the equivalent of the red Solo cup was the commodity $15, $20 battery that was powering this thoughtful, crafted oil that many brands were spending millions of dollars to deliver to the consumer. So we had taken an angle to say, let's become the purple cow or the differentiator in the space. While everyone else is screaming cheaper, 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 which is obviously degrading performance and the experience, we said, how do we invest better? Not only to think about a product that would outlast the commodity products so that you would have to buy less of it, but secondly, really bridge, I think, the gap that was there between function and just use and lifestyle. We believe everybody has a personal expression of some style. And if consuming cannabis was going to become a ritual in your life, whether it was social or for medication, then ultimately it had to be an expression of you, much like the phone cases. Out of the millions you would choose that one phone case. Out of the million, 5, 6, 7 phone colors or iPhone colors, you'd pick the one color. And so we borrowed a lot of principles from brands we built over the years to craft it into an experience that delivered on all the things that mattered to us, which was the type of consumer you were, meaning the type of activity you like to engage in, the style that you may exhibit, whether it was outdoor and adventure or more the minimalist and Tesla, Apple type of consumer, and then all while delivering still on performance, which had the controls, the safety, the efficacy, efficiency, and quality of build that consumers inhaling and using such product would feel the trust and be able to depend on that product to deliver the experience that they needed.
That's an important part of it, really, is I think probably the most important part of it is to have that continuous feedback with your consumer about how their experience is changing and how they want it to change. Tell me about what the research process was like right at the beginning. How do you research cannabis consumers? What did you do and what did you find out?
So funny is in design, you get really enamored, and sometimes probably design teams and groups get a little bit overly obsessive over data and trying to slice data in a way that says this is going to lead us to the promised land of perfect decisions. In this one, because literally we're dealing with organic plant material, meaning it's variable at all fronts, and every company producing the oil, because let's make the clear distinction, Vessel has only been about delivering the experience, but the consumable aspect has been trusted to other brands that actually make either the flower, the oil, or the concentrates. So we're a facilitator. We're the bridge from the consumable to the consumer. And I wish that there was some scientific process I could brag about. I wish there was a data set that I could show off, but this one was as rudimentary as it gets. If you zoom back to when we started this at my home, we bought maybe 80 to 100 cartridges from every different brand. We bought every battery that we could imagine. And much like a Rubik's Cube, we laid these things out. And we tried every combination. Yes, it would only last for a few puffs at a time because we'd get pretty mind altered from the R&D.
Right.
But there was no way to really comprehensively think about, you could get form and function down, but there's so much about the experience on the vacuum or the traction of the pool, the
Mm.
airflow, the temperature, the throat burn, that there's no way to cut around it except for to consume it and try every combination to figure out and annotate where's the bell curve of all of the right decisions to make this work, not for 100% of everything out there, but what can we do to enhance the 80 to 90% of all of the oil options or the vape options that were in the space?
So you consumed a lot. And then what?
Yes, for weeks we were R&Ding, which really meant consuming, annotating everything that was important. We talked to retailers because we were with so many dispensaries. We just asked them simple T-chart type questions. What are all the problems you deal with? All the consumers coming back to stores, and what are they griping about? Simply take that as your mission and flip the script and make it a non-issue in your design going forward. Again, I'd like to brag that there's some uber scientific way that we went about this, but it really was leaning on stakeholders, meaning i.e. ourselves as consumers, and what do we feel was the right axis of decisions to deliver a perfect experience in our minds, and then
Hmm.
marry that up with the partners within the industry, which are the retailers that ultimately are building trust with their consumers and making it so their lives are easier in pushing product, which meant that anything that they were complaining about, warranty issues, failures, quality issues, that we nipped those in the bud and made it a non-issue going forward as we introduced our brand. So it really is a collaboration between all of the key stakeholders, just taking into account. And you know what the fancy word is? It's listening. We listened to what
Mm.
consumers and retailers would say, and we incorporated it as influence into our design.
Wow, that's such a beautiful way to sort of bring it all back to the cannabis community. You start trying out your own competition and enjoying it, or maybe not enjoying it so much, and then finding out sort of where the holes are in that delivery experience.
Think about how many industries, most industries, you never want to be all things to all people. Agree?
Hmm.
And in this space, it is one of the worst but best situations that, because it's an emerging industry, you're attracting literally anybody from 21 all the way up to 90 plus years old.
Hmm.
Every gender, every ethnicity, every age group, every cohort is introduced to this and equally excited. So going in with this narrow scope of the old school archetyping Anne, who's 40 years old, that drives an Audi and loves to, that doesn't apply here. And so in a lot of ways, focusing in any other way except for the axis we talked about, which was the intangibles on experience, the technical function, and so on. That is the only universal language, but there wasn't any other way to really create that distinction when thinking about the consumer.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Have you seen any changes in these consumers, before or after the pandemic? But I guess you sort of answered it in that it's not really about the consumer changing so much as it is sort of what's on the marketplace at the moment and what are people looking for and what's missing.
There's an incredible amount of currency built on trust and word of mouth,
Hmm.
because you have to remember that in a new industry, especially around vice or medication, and whether it's medical or rec, it's new. And there's a lot of feeling and emotion tied to an experience. And for some people, it's horrible. For some people, it's enjoyable from day one. But at the core, there's still a little bit of fear of people wanting to go to a dispensary and feel like a deer in headlights and having to make decisions about things they don't even know about, right? And asking questions isn't innately a natural thing for a lot of people. So
Mm.
when you think about all the considerations there, you had to build something in a way that consumers were willing to use their trust and relationships with their friends and family, so that if you did create something that stood above the rest, that they would advocate. They would be the ultimate quote unquote storyteller. I don't like really saying marketing tool, but it's the best storytellers to advocate and say, hey, have you discovered this before? Have you tried or heard about this brand Vessel or brand X?
That's such a good point. It is a social thing that we're doing here. We're consuming cannabis. I mean, most of the time, folks like to do that in a social environment.
So much of consumption in cannabis is social. We took that position from day one. And so if you believed in the ritual social aspect, we better design something that's worth talking about. And
Mhm.
that really was what we leveraged over the past few years, is just creating something remarkable enough that people would want to share the story with others.
Have you seen any change in the way that people are using it socially? Is there more demand for something that you hadn't seen before?
I would totally say it. I think going back to your story, which you told on the aluminum can or the apple, there's definitely less worry about things like COVID because they weren't a topic back then. But sharing and anything with the mouth exchanging hands has probably become the most sensitive thing today.
Mm.
Going back to some of the economics, I think during COVID, our sales had doubled, tripled. People were at home, they needed some ways to relax or reduce anxiety or whatever it may be. And I think seeking out options like what Vessel had to present was an opportune time. That said, the shareable part of it probably has changed. I don't think the comfort's there to just, spin it around in circles with groups, but no doubt the experience of consuming together. And I think people all having some sort of expression again of, hey, you consume, I consume too. It's much like when people discover their craft beer, they're always willing to talk about what other beer or IPA they've discovered. So we've seen an uptick. We've seen the expectations that consumers have around design, even some of the things where we had launched things early on, consumers really didn't appreciate what we had done, have now become more commonplace. And they're actually almost throwing back our whole design at us saying, could you even do it even better?
Like what?
In the beginning, what was funny was a lot of devices, for example, people didn't really pay attention to keeping it upright to keep the oil, meaning using gravity to keep the oil ready to consume. And they would just lay the device flat. And so what would happen is the oil would just kind of rest sideways, and then you'd have to tip it back north and south to let it settle to get to consume it. So we had designed our devices to basically have an ecosystem where if you look at our site, there's devices with a charger that stands upright. And we designed all of this because our vision wasn't ever to be a vape company. Our vision was to be an experience company. And we weren't necessarily trying to be the best vape pen battery. We wanted to be a household consideration, meaning design experiences that felt one for one, that like they belonged in your home or on your desk or your kitchen counter. And so it was the thoughtfulness to design things in a way that stood up north and south, kept the oil the way it needed to be, but charged in a very elegant way so that it stayed the way it was. And I remember a year ago or two, we had one device that we were just on target. We needed to quote unquote rush to market. And fortunately, we violated one of our own design principles that it needed to stand up and down, but we had a cradle for it. So we felt like we had the right solution. Our critics were throwing it right back at us when we were the first to introduce the standing up concept. And now it's become already like an expectation with the consumers. So all it did was solidify that our intent was right. We had compromised one time to just get the product out to market. Obviously in Gen 2, we're going back to get it right again. These are some of the decisions you have to make, and it's good. Consumers taking time to criticize is a beautiful thing. It's a scary thing when they don't say anything back. So we took it to heart, and we're just improving things and getting back to where we started. But it's just a fun feedback loop, as you had mentioned.
I love watching that evolution, especially when it comes to things that I have in my home. I love to update the technology that I have. I feel like if I can find a product that fits better with the aesthetic of my home, I'm more likely to buy that product. And that includes my smokables, because like some people have a little bar and they have some beautiful decanters. I'm not a drinker, I'm a smoker. I want to have that sort of presentation in my house as well, alongside the quality of the product. Like I want something that looks great. That's a major part of design.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing. Everybody always starts with their favorite consumable, whether in this case, if it's wine or scotch or whatever it may be. And then it's always about rounding out the experience with the right glasses, the right mixers. And we are the quote unquote picks and shovels of the industry, as we said.
Just the tools, though. Did you ever consider making the product itself as well, like the vapes?
I think staying out of the game because of the highly competitive nature of producing the consumable, which sometimes I've regretted, that is the most complete part of it, is doing all end to end. But in this world where consumers have to make so many decisions about so many things, to be the brand that they choose to replace other brands with, you have to do things, some exceptional things for them to do that. And one of the things we always stress is earning a seat at the table. We started with vape because it was a category that was grossly overlooked by the industry, and we felt we could elevate through design language. But only a matter of time, in about a year, consumers were saying, when are you going to move to dry herb? When are you going to move to other areas like dabbing and concentrates? Because they trusted the experience they discovered in vape. And now them asking is the golden ticket for us. It meant that we did what we hoped we would do, which was make something meaningful enough that they've given us license to move into other categories. You could think of 100 brands that went from, hey, we're a sports brand, immediately to we want to be the apparel company. Now you have to choose between Lulu, Nike, Under Armour, and everything. And that is incredibly competitive. So it's better to have a tighter focus and wait patiently for that moment when the consumers have validated, put their stamp of approval. But when they're asking for it, you got to go 100 miles an hour, because that's literally the feedback you're looking for is you've done it right. Now let's keep it going.
Absolutely. I want to move on to talk about sustainability in cannabis tech, which I know is a major pillar in Vessel's brand. Batteries, lighters, they're all bad for the earth. Lithium batteries put in the trash are a fire hazard. So there's quite a lot of issues that folks who care about sustainability are worried about when it comes to cannabis tech. Tell me a little bit about your push in New York to get policy for better cannabis waste disposal.
So to understand New York, I have to take a step back on the broader picture just for a minute. The sustainability thing, it was something that was woven into our narrative from the day we concepted the company. Like we thought about what would matter to us, not to politics or PR. It was, we knew and we could see because most of the cannabis industry's technology was borrowed from nicotine, right? Nicotine
Mm,
had moved from cigarettes to e-cigarettes and the technology was flawed for cannabis given the nuances of the oils and so on, but it was there. It was the right now solution. And I've said this before. Sadly, what we've encouraged is the industry to trade out cigarette butts for batteries. And you've already hit it on the head that I go back to lifetimes. How long did it take for us to train people not to even put AA batteries in the trash? Right. I've got these ever so growing bags of batteries in my home
yeah.
that sit there, and luckily, Home Depots in certain areas will collect them. But that is a behavior that still today has not been 100% people know what to do with them. And
Hmm.
so, right away, if you have the forethought and the care, and again, thoughtfulness and caring mindset is one of our absolute brand pillars. You already knew the industry was going to perpetuate a bigger problem as it grew, which was batteries, batteries, batteries. It was going to be packaging, like everything was going to become an issue. Anything this size and scale was going to create an additional problem. So in the beginning, we said there's a few ways to be sustainable. And this some of it's on the nose. There's recycling, there's waste management, there's programs so that consumers know where to bring any of this product to dispose properly. But there's also design considerations I touched on, which is designing things with better components, better quality. Because if inferior quality requires you to buy 5 or 6 batteries a year, but we only require you to buy one because it outlasts the 5, us being able to reduce the carbon footprint of 5 batteries for our one, while not the perfect solution, because yes, it still has a battery, lithium ion, and so on, our view has always been just because you can't solve 100% of the problem, it doesn't excuse you from attempting to solve 5 or 10 or 50%. So
Hmm.
our constant competitive internal nature has been to always make the decisions we can as a culture to invest in better, to mitigate more waste or, create less waste. In packaging, of course, we had to do the things that retailers needed, which was create all the flash, much that's been set by Apple and so on. Unfortunately, it's part of the evil of having to gain attention and create friction with beautiful packaging. But now that we've established ourselves as a brand, we've made a concerted effort to pull that all the way back to fully sustainable one color inks. Many people don't realize that most packaging, even though it's paper, does not belong in the recycle bin. And so they're not always recyclable. Then, when you start acting the part and you start making motions towards, we believe it, we're demonstrating it, you had to look at the legal landscape of the US. California already had butchered a lot of this stuff. Colorado had set a good tempo and had some early wins on sustainability programs. We sought one of the lead advocates that wrote the big portions of the model bill for Colorado and had success passing it. Mitchell's his name. And he joined our team as our head of social impact and environment and helped us take and leverage his experience in Colorado and present it in a very timely way for New York. Because look, New York's a big, big town, population dense. You all know what happens when New York shuts off trash for a day.
Hmm.
The city is under garbage. And so thinking about the most dense population in the country going legal, we better get ahead of this and poke our heads out and say, we need to clean up language that conflicts from municipality to state to federal. Let's do it the right way. So far, it's been received well, but there's still a lot of work to do. And more brands nowadays are starting to get conscious. And then for those who are public, Vessel's now been acquired by a public company. ESG is a mandate, right? We have to have expressions of ESG actions as part of being a public and showing responsibility. So these are all things that matter. And again, we trained for this from years ago and had the forethought to think about it. So it's just become second nature to us. And we're obviously thankful for that.
That's terrific. It matters very much to me, and I know to a lot of other consumers that they support brands that care about these kinds of things and that we spend our money in places that reflect our beliefs in that same way. Apart from bettering the battery life, how else do you think that vape tech can improve in the future to be more sustainably minded? Because not all companies have thought about this from the beginning like you have. How would you suggest other companies make that same change?
So I want to share a data point with you as well, that there are consumers like you, like me, like our team that believe in sustainability, and it's a big thing, and it may even drive decisions we make on whatever product we purchase. We did a little bit of an analysis on a cohort of over 100,000 and realized that still to this day, 65% of people don't give a hoot about anything environment related.
Wow.
But pandering to the majority is a mistake. Just because people don't care doesn't mean that we can't serve the 35% that do. And so doing right is still a discipline of don't. in a lot of cases. What do we refuse to do? What are we doing to make decisions? Much like Patagonia, they've always been such a staunch brand to stay their position. I think the latest was all the corporate gear, like with the vests and Silicon Valley outfits where they had the company logos, and they realized they were creating a lot of waste because once they left the company, they didn't want to wear it anymore. They refused to do the program, which is a huge revenue driver for them. And so overall, there's still a long way to go. It's going to take collective buy-in and reinforcement at all levels, from multi-state operators to brands to consumers to the government offices. We're going to have to pound that sand as hard as we can for years to come. But in the meantime, going back to the comment that there's always ways to improve, we're already on to the next generation of our product, for instance, where as product degrades, in our case right now, unfortunately, once the vape pen, the battery portion dies, the whole device is rendered useless. I'm just going to give away the secret sauce. It's not that secretive. But we're starting to design product in ways where the battery itself is removable and replaceable, thus extending the life of the rest of the product. And that means that less material will end up in bins. Important to also annotate that we've got a partnership with Gaiaca. We've been very open and proud about that relationship. Had built a business that was all about one man's trash is literally another man or industry's treasure. And they've found ways, and we're working in concert to put receptacles in the right stores where it's allowed and there isn't conflicting language, but consumers can safely and feel encouraged to bring back product. And they break it all down to 100% reusable, reconstitutable products. So it's a combination of all of this, right? It takes a village to make things happen in this case. And so again, from product design to packaging considerations to retail initiatives and programs to writing bills at the state level, so we've got more broad reach to message to consumers. You really can't do one little thing at a time. It has to be all of it, or else the message just doesn't compound or become powerful enough. So that's the only way to look at it. We're affecting design or intention in every single way.
That's great. I really hope to see more companies emulating exactly what Vessel is doing. Thank you, James. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
A massive thanks to James Choe, CEO of Vessel brand. On a personal note, I asked to try Vessel's Helix one-hitter pipe for dry cannabis flower. It's a beautiful piece of rose gold tech with a brass Helix tube inside that helps cool the smoke and catches the debris. I liked it. It was good. Next week, we've got Different Leaf's High Holiday Gift Guide with author John Arvanitis from the pages of Different Leaf, the magazine's merch and more section. Subscribe wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss next week, and follow us on social media at Different Leaf and at Different_Leaf. And I'm on social media at Brit the British. Remember to head over to differentleaf.com to order the new Fall Edibles magazine issue mailed directly to you, or go to the subscribe and shop tab to find the nearest in-person retailer selling Different Leaf in real life. That's differentleaf.com.